All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Second hour of the show. We're with you until noon. We're going to start off this second hour by talking about the economy, by talking about fears of a recession. Now, a new report by Deloitte reveals forecast suggesting that Canada will avoid a recession this year. And they continue on by saying that spending might increase at a faster rate than expected as interest rate hikes are on the horizon. Let's go now to Mario Iacobacci, a partner and economist at Deloitte Canada. Mario, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about recession and rebound, because I hear people talking about a rebound will come, but there's no recession. So if there's no recession, what exactly are we rebounding from?
Well, the idea is we may have avoided a recession, which technically is a drop in GDP over two quarters. When you look back at 2023. We weren't expecting much growth. It turns out that we've had growth of 1.1% in GDP overall. That's after inflation. Mm-hmm. And 2024, it looks like it's going to be similar. In other words, low growth, but we're not dropping, right? Uh-huh. And this is due to several factors. There's several things that kind of underpin, if you like, our that we may have avoided a recession. The first is that the U.S. economy is turning out to be much stronger. It's really firing on all cylinders. Mm-hmm. And secondly, interest rates we expect are going to start being brought down. We expect the Bank of Canada to begin to reduce rates by 25 basis points in June, the first cut, since they've been raising rates early in 2022. There won't be huge cuts, but it'll be the beginning of interest rate reductions, and we expect 3 interest rate reductions this year by the end of the year. And then finally, the labor market. People have held on to their jobs. The labor market's turned out to be quite strong and has remained relatively tight, and that's also supported people's incomes as they've been dealing with higher interest rate costs on their mortgages and other such things. So
Mario,
that's kind of yes. Yeah,
no, sorry. Finish your thought there. I got one more question. Finish your thought.
And those are the positives, right? That we, that from our perspective, mean that we think we're likely to avoid a recession. There are some negatives, but those are the positives, if you like.
So I wanted to get to the subject of GDP growth here for a second, right? So it's not lost on me. Last week we had the numbers from Statistics Canada. Canada mm-hmm. added 1 million people in 9 months. Okay, so when you add 1 million people. It would be it's almost impossible if you had 1 million people that GDP would go down, right? So obviously we're going to grow in that respect. But I'm looking at these other numbers on GDP mm-hmm. per capita. GDP per capita.
Yes.
We're now lower than we were at the end of 2014, right? So
absolutely.
So is the immigration aspect, the fact that we're adding 1 million people every 9 months, is it actually hiding a much worse picture economically?
Yes. That's the quick answer, right? Because, in other words, so technically we may have avoided a recession, but people have felt it in their pocketbooks, right? Why? Because essentially you've had a drop in GDP on a per capita basis. So, in other words, people have had to tighten their belts in order to divert their spending to cover higher interest rate payments, right? Mm-hmm. And that's hurt. So, while on the face of it, the numbers look good, people have felt what we think modest recession. They've felt probably a similar recession to what we did in, say, going back 2008, 2009, when in Canada, we felt a very modest recession. In the U.S., it was a bloodbath, right? Mm-hmm. But here, it was a modest one. And that's probably, I think, when you look at Canadian households, we've gone through the same process, but the numbers look better. So you're right.
So let's talk about one thing you mentioned. You mentioned before the U.S. economy. I think you said firing on all cylinders, right?
Yes,
I
yes.
look at the U.S. numbers and I go, my goodness, they're so strong, and Canada, a different picture. Okay, so what are the policies? Let's talk policy here, especially when we just discussed the GDP per capita and how it's not growing. What are the policy differences between both sides of the border that have led to a different picture when it comes to the economy?
Listen, there are quite a few differences, and I'm not going to start to go into all the policy differences. But one thing I will point out, for example, is that both countries have had a rapid rise in interest rates. The Canadian central bank started a little bit earlier, did it maybe a little bit faster, but the U.S. Followed suit. They were a little bit behind. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that these interest rates take time to basically in terms of how they act as a drag on the economy. It takes about 12 to 18 months for any interest rate change to fully impact the economy. Right now, in the U.S., that lag is even greater. Why? For things like, for example, when people take mortgages out in the U.S., they're 25-year mortgages, so they can sit with that low rate for 25 years. Here, we renew after 5 years, right? So a lot of renewals are coming up this year, next, right? That people took out really low rates in 2020 and 2021, right? Well, in the U.S., that lag is longer, right? So it's taking a longer time for interest rates to impact the economy, to slow down the economy, okay? That's certainly one factor, not the only one. In the U.S., there's also been, higher rates of business investment. In Canada, we've had very low rates of business investment, and so we've really been hurt by that. But that's a longer term factor, right? Like that drives issues like productivity growth. In other words, are we going to see increases in real wages down the road? Well, that's going to be modest here because we're not seeing productivity growth, whereas in the U.S. we are. So there are policy differences. I mean, here in Canada we are acting a lot more in terms of shifting to the green economy, shifting to clean tech than in the U.S. Can I just ask you this question, because I look at the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., right? The IRA. It's tremendous for green growth. The battery stuff that has happened in the States because of that. So I see that there. I see Texas, by the way, which isn't big, which you never think of when it comes to the environment. But Texas is now at 40% renewables for production of their energy. So it does seem like the U.S. is jumping on board the green shift, but they're just doing it in a smarter way. They're doing it perhaps, there are some differences, right? In both cases, you have governments that are throwing a lot of money, a lot of subsidies, but there are differences. The way those subsidies are being, let's say, handed out, in the U.S., the programs are relatively simple in terms of how investors understand them. They're relatively easy to access. Whereas here they're done on a more discretionary basis, on an application, on a grant application basis. Okay, that's one difference that's quite important, right? There's also issues of regulation, and here in Canada, we've had to battle with much heavier regulation historically than in the U.S., and that's also kind of been a drag on investment, right? Taxation policies are also, another area where, we perform a lot. Our performance is a lot lower than in the U.S. And so these are all broad policy areas, and this is not from just last year, but it's been the case for several years, right? For quite a number of years, and explains partly why in the U.S. you have higher rates of investment. And hence, the picture is a bit different. But some of these things are kind of long-term things like investment, but the cycle, the issue, the point that the point at which the cycle is at, that's a different matter. And in the U.S., the economy is slowing down, but the markets have celebrated, that they're going to be avoiding a recession, and that's been the case for quite some time now. In fact, we talk about soft landing. In the U.S., there is no landing.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Mario, listen, we got to leave it there. A wonderful discussion. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elias.
That's Mario Iacobacci, a partner and economist at Deloitte Canada.